Hello, this is Coach Aaron Saft in the Running is Life podcast. And I did a talk with my athletes the other day. We typically do 2 Zoom calls a week, and we go over specific topics. And this past week, we talked about HRV and its predictability for recovery. And this was all prompted by a podcast from Training Peaks. They had a great guest on. I'll put that link in the show notes for that podcast if you're interested to listen and learn more about this. Training Peaks has some great articles as well, and they talk a lot about HRV and how it can be used, and well, perhaps how it should be used. So I found this podcast really interesting. And before we had that conversation on the Zoom call with my athletes, one of my athletes, Jim, sent me a great article from Outside Magazine by author Alex Hutchinson, which I'll also link in the show notes. And the title was "A New Study Used Machine Learning to Predict Athletic Recovery. Researchers in New Zealand use athlete data to pick up patterns in how we recover. Their insights are surprising." So that was a really great article, and I sincerely appreciate Jim kind of sharing that with me because it kind of added to the conversation about HRV and how much worth we should put into the HRV data. So what we did was we went over the podcast and the insights that it brought, and then we talked about the article. I felt this would be great to share with everyone else because the feedback that I received from that talk, I record that and send it out to all my athletes so that if they couldn't make the meeting, at least they could listen or watch and kind of see, what we went over, and if it prompted questions or conversations, then we could have those privately. This podcast once again, it talked about. What is HRV, and how should we use it for predictability of training? Because a lot of times we let these numbers affect us. And again, this Outside Magazine article had some really good insights as to how we should use it and what should we use to predict training patterns and recovery and such. HRV, it's kind of been found and touted as a one-stop shop for recovery score. And should it be? Well, let's talk about HRV, heart rate variability. So basically, our heart doesn't beat the same. Okay, we're not giving the same electrical impulse, the same heartbeat all the time, right? Our heart rate changes based on stresses placed upon us. And we're going to talk about those stresses here in a little bit, but heart rate variability, HRV, is tracking that heartbeat throughout the day and seeing what is the variation in your heart rate based on the stresses. Okay. It is more sensitive to our recovery, our amount of stress than resting heart rate is. So it gives us a little bit more information than resting heart rate in that regard. And it's as I said, it's measuring stress. Okay, so it's measuring the stress placed upon the body and how our body reacts to that stress. Okay, so it's our response to the stress, whatever that stressor may be. Now, those stressors can be a million different things. It's not just running. We have to take that into consideration when we're, determining should our HRV score be worth anything, worth, noting for the day. Because there are such things as temperature. Temperature is a stress. Obviously, it increases our heart rate. Okay. So temperature is a stress. Altitude is a stress. Cortisol from our normal everyday jobs or families or life stress, that obviously is a stress as well. Lack of sleep is a stress. Lack of hydration is a stress. Lack of nutrition is a stress. So lots of stressors here. Okay. So when we take this, that's why we have to look at the fuller picture, is because we are not solely looking at the recovery from our running. We're looking at what is life presented for us? What of our life stressors presented for us? Because all of that gets into this snapshot of HRV. Okay. So it's not just a running recovery score. Okay. It's a life stressor score, is what it really is. And HRV is not a predictor. It is not a predictor. Okay. So it's not saying, okay, your HRV is suppressed today, then it should not be the sole indicator that you should not exercise on that given day. Okay. So, and we'll get into more about that. But, as I said, it is not a predictor. Okay. So don't use it as such, not on a daily basis. And he kind of gets into how we should use it. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. There are no universal ranges. So usually, if you are looking at your HRV, you are going to see you fall in the normal range. Okay, so there's from, let's just say your normal range is, let's say, 46 to 56. That's your normal range. Okay, your range is completely different from other people. There is no universal range, even within age groups. So there's no universal for 45-year-olds. You cannot compare yourself to another individual. There is no cross comparison. So don't compare yourself to other individuals' HRV and their normal ranges, because it doesn't match up. We are all genetically different, and thus we cannot compare ourselves to someone else. And your range is based upon your history. The more variation that you have in your heart rate variability, it means that you're going to have a wider range. Okay. So your range could be, more so than even 10, what do they, I think they measured in seconds per, oh gosh, I'm sorry, I don't remember the the measurement off the top of my head, but again, it could be a bigger range than somebody else just because of your variation is wider. Okay, so know that as well. He goes on to the guest speaker goes on to talk about range should be taken from 1 month's worth of data. If we're going to create a standard deviation, we need at least 1 month worth of data. That's a good foundation for creating your own range. So if you've just begun to track HRV, your range is not going to be as accurate as someone that has a month's worth of data. Okay. So take that into consideration as well, is that if you are newer to it, it's probably not as accurate as someone that has more data. The other thing is that seasons, being spring, summer, fall, winter, they have an effect on our HRV. It's going to be a totally different range in the summer than it is in the winter, right? Your range can change because the stressors, again, that your range changes based on the variation. Summer being, and especially for those people that live in climates that are extremely hot and humid, that's going to have a more adverse effect on you. It's going to create more stressors upon you than somebody that lives in a more mild climate. Okay. So seasons are going to change our range. Okay. Because again, it's looking at that variation in heart rate, right? So understand that your range can change based on the season, which I hadn't thought about prior to this, listening to this podcast. So what he goes on to say, and I touched upon this, is don't worry if you see suppression on a given day, and don't try to base your training day solely off of that. This gentleman has an app that he created. It's called HRV for Training app. Okay, HRV for Training. So this app, it says even before you look at your HRV, even before you take your HRV. So, a lot of our watches already do HRV readings for us, which is great. If it does not, then you can probably use your phone to take your HRV. There's a way to measure your HRV through your phone. It uses the camera system and does an optical reading. And he talks about that the most accurate way to get HRV is by wearing a chest heart rate monitor. because that is tracking the electrical impulses of the heart. That is the most, the best. But, also the optical technologies, such as like the Whoop strap, the Halo ring, our watches that have the optical heart rate monitoring systems, our phone. These are okay ways to do it as long as they're in a stationary position. Okay. So he recommends sitting down to take your HRV. Because, and we're kind of getting a little bit sidetracked here, and I'll get back to my main point, but um, if we're laying down and our watch is taking our HRV and kind of giving us an HRV score, there is really not much stress that's taking place because we're not moving. We're flat, we're relaxed, we're not, there's nothing much going on. When you sit up, you've just created some stress upon the body. That is an activity. So it raises the heart rate a little bit. So you do increase your heart rate. So that does kind of change the HRV. But if you are taking your HRV consistently in a seated position, then that's fine. Like, you want to be consistent with how you take your HRV. He says you do not want to stand and take your HRV because now we're using a lot of musculature to do so and creating a lot more um, uh, stress upon the body. Okay. So he recommends that if you are taking a reading using your phone or something, my watch, I can take an HRV reading. He says, do it in the sitting position. And, he says it's best to do it in the morning, when you first wake up, kind of get in the routine of doing that. And the reason being, you can take it in the evening, but what he says is that you've had a lot of stress during the day and you may be closer to a stressor like a run, right? So if you run in the PM, taking that HRV reading so close to that stressor is going to give you a higher score, a more suppressed HRV reading because you've placed that stress upon your body so close to the reading. So, things to consider. Like I said, he said the first thing when the morning, if you do it consistently sitting up, that's a great time to do it because you've had the least amount of stress, and you're furthest away from any stressor, other than the fact that you sat up to take your reading. Okay. So, getting back to what I was saying, he has this app, HRV for training. And with that, he starts out with a subjective questionnaire. Okay. How are you feeling? How is your motivation? Okay. Like, look, how is your sleep? Do you feel rested? These type of questions that you should answer prior to taking your HRV and seeing what your HRV score is. And we'll get into the article and talk about why that's super important. Okay. But knowing those ahead of time, right? And thinking about how you are actually feeling versus looking at your HRV score and determining, oh, it's suppressed today. If you're feeling good, you're probably fine to do, your run. Now, it may not be like a workout. You may not be able to do a workout. You may be, maybe you see that number is suppressed. So you go out and you warm up, right? You do your warm up and you're like, actually, I think I'm okay. And you go through with the workout, right? That's totally fine to do, right? And you may get into the warm up and you may feel awful. And you're like, hey, today wasn't the day for this workout. And you may have to move that workout. But at least give yourself that opportunity to get out there and try, right? That's the big thing here. Do not let that HRV number, if it is suppressed, totally deter you from doing, what's going on that day. I have a number of athletes that look at their HRV on a daily basis and they'll say, hey, it's actually suppressed today, but I felt pretty good. Now, remember, okay, that score can be suppressed by other determinants than just your run, right? Again, it could be maybe you had a super stressful day. Maybe you had an awful night's sleep. Maybe you didn't hydrate enough. Maybe it's a combination of a million different things that suppress that score, but for whatever reason, your body still feels fine to perform. So, now, do I suggest you're always, losing sleep or dehydrated? No, we do not want you in those states at any point. But if it happens, again, if you see a suppressed score, understand it may not be suppressed solely based on your running. Okay. And it may not be that you need to take a day off. Maybe you can still go out and get an easy jog in, and that's okay. Because what we see is typically if it's suppressed one day, it's probably going to be back to normal the next day. right? The HRV typically bounces back. And if it's high, then you can probably count on the next day it being normal or suppressed. That's just the way it goes with HRV. So, it is predictable in that manner. So understand that as well. But answer those questions. That's it. Answer those questions before you look at your HRV score, because that may give you a better indication of how you're feeling than the HRV score itself. Okay. So think about that prior to taking your HRV score and being biased by what the number presents. Okay. Then the other big thing is observe how you feel when your HRV reads suppressed, or when it reads normal, or reads above normal. Okay. Understanding what your body feels like when it goes through these and seeing either consistencies or inconsistencies can help you when you see that number. So take note of that, right? So if you look at that HRV data, take note of how you actually felt on that day. Write it down, put it in your log. Okay. Jot it down to see what was what what's the reality. um okay. Let's see. The big thing that he says here, okay, in this podcast, and then I'm going to get on to the Outdoor Magazine article, was that he concluded with the fact that we have all of these readiness scores. How ready are you to exercise? Right? Your Garmin presents you with your body battery, right? Like what's the body battery telling you? And what he says is that these indicators have and make too many assumptions about what's going on in your life. It's only got a few data points and metrics to track from. And so it makes this assumption based off of its algorithm that, hey, no, your body battery is low today. You're not ready to perform. Okay. But there is the true indicator of your actual readiness is muscle soreness. And so it has no way of tracking muscle soreness, right? That's the real indicator. How much breakdown do your muscles have? How sore are they? And without knowing that, it can't really tell you, are you ready to perform? So what he says is don't buy into, don't read into these readiness scores, these body battery things, because it doesn't know. It doesn't know what your body is actually capable of on that given day. So again, you have to take the subjective measure and ask yourself, how sore am I? How tired are my muscles? Is it feasible for me to do what's on today's schedule based off of soreness and fatigue? That's the big thing. Okay. Because there really is no context to the scores, the body battery and the readiness scores. So don't read into them so much. Okay. So again, be careful with HRV. What what he suggests, what the guest on the podcast suggests, is that you look at your weekly average. Okay. So again, taking data from over the course of a month to 2 months, getting a weekly average and seeing that average score, right? How far above or below are you? All right. If your HRV is severely suppressed at the end of the week, then perhaps it is time to take a little bit of recovery. Know that the next week should perhaps not be as stressful. Okay. That's how he suggests using HRV, is over the course of a week, the average from the week, and looking at that and seeing, okay, I'm still within normal range in my average. Okay. So if you're still within your normal range, you're good to continue to train, just as the schedule says. But if it's slightly suppressed, maybe you diminish a little bit of volume or a little bit of intensity from the week, so that that HRV score rebounds and you get back to your average. If it's above average, then you didn't challenge yourself enough, right? You didn't give yourself enough stimulus during the week. So you can use it as a training guide, but use it on a weekly average if you want to use HRV. Okay, that's how he suggests using HRV for training purposes. Don't use it on a daily basis. Okay, don't let it dictate your training on a daily basis, is the big takeaway here. Okay, and it's not that you have to use it on that weekly basis either, but if you're interested in HRV and want to try doing it that way, it can be a good measure. Now, getting into the article again, Alex Hutchinson wrote this article, and I'll put the link in the show notes. But what he gets into is they did a study, again in New Zealand. They let's see here. I'm going to scroll through the article here. Um, these athletes that they used, they were really big on the idea of collecting data on themselves. I'm going to read a little bit from the article here. The group ranged from amateurs to professionals and mostly were triathletes, along with runners, cyclists, and a few rowers. They all had to log their workouts on Training Peaks, use a wearable device to measure sleep and heart rate variability, answer a 4-question survey every morning about their subjective well being, and track everything they ate. The last one is a big barrier for most people. So the study focused on people who are already regularly tracking their food intake with an app such as MyFitnessPal. Okay. Um, so they got into how do they predict workout recovery? That was the big piece of this. And the article goes on and says the goal of collecting all this data was to predict how participants would answer a simple question every morning: how recovered they felt, ranging from very poorly recovered to very well recovered. Um, so they used more than 3 dozen variables in this to to put into their algorithm to determine how was their recovery. And based on the training duration and the number of calories consumed, they basically um, found out what was the best indicator for finding out um, if these athletes were recovering. So based on those 36 factors, here's what they found. Um, the biggest predictor of recovery, and this goes back to what I was just talking about, was soreness. How sore was the athlete? That was the number one predictor of how ready they were for the next day's training. Okay. Um, the next biggest one was sleep index. Okay. And you can look into this article. Okay. The article has the results of the big indicators. It then went into resting heart rate. How is the resting heart rate? How is their sleep quality? That's number 4. And then it gets into protein intake, the 7-day average, uh, and then another protein intake, calorie intake, hours slept, 7-day average sleep, and 7-day carb um, intake. So, I mean, nowhere in there did they even mention HRV as a good predictor of recovery and predictability for readiness for training. They talk about the sleep index and they go on to define that as multiplying sleep duration by subjective sleep quality. For example, if you sleep for 7 hours and rate your sleep quality as 8 out of a 10, your sleep index is 56. So they multiplied 7 hours of sleep times the quality of 8. 7 times 8 is 56. Um, so how you slept and how your first few steps out of bed feel dominate your perception of how ready you are to train again. Okay. So let's see. Um, they also did a simpler study, and this was kind of interesting, using only soreness, sleep quality, which we just defined, perceived life stress score. So that's a subjective score of how much stress you feel in life, and perceived recovery score from the previous 2 days. The simpler model, this model that they're using, right here, versus the 36 factors that they put into their algorithm, it actually yielded very similar results. Um, Suggesting that we don't need to go crazy trying to track everything, right? We don't need to go tracking the HRV score and be worried about reading too much into that. Um, so they say there's a big caveat to this. Okay, and I'd be remiss not to mention this. They say when they used their model on each individual athlete's data, it didn't do as well at predicting workout recovery. What worked better was to run a separate analysis of each athlete's data to figure out which variables were most important to them. Again, we're all so different. So, just because this is, this data yields that soreness and sleep index were the top two, that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be the same across the board for everyone. Okay. They say, for example, one athlete's recovery could be predicted well using just sleep data from the prior night and the preceding week. Another athlete had their best predictions using muscle soreness, the previous day's protein intake, and the previous day's recovery score. It doesn't take many variables to predict recovery, but those variables seem to be different for everyone. So, but again, they make no mention of using HRV. Okay, that's the big point here. Okay, so there could be multiple variables, but we need not only rely on HRV. Okay, that's the big thing here is it's not um, um, it's not huge, and this is why they go on to stress what predicts heart rate variability. So that was a big part of this study as well. Um, so the what predicts heart rate variability changes. The primary thing that affects HRV is yesterday's HRV. Again, when I talked about this earlier, if like, and they go on to say, if your HRV increased yesterday, it's likely to decrease today. If it decreased yesterday, it's likely to increase today. So that's the big thing. And it goes into resting heart rate and talking about resting heart rate because those are the next two variables: change in resting heart rate and your actual resting heart rate. Those are big in determining HRV. So we kind of know what HRV is going to do. It's if it was suppressed, if it decreased, then it's most likely going to increase the next day. That's not much of a predictor. That's it's quite simple. We don't want to use that as our means of saying like, am I recovered? Because we already know what that what that score is probably going to do. Um, let's see here. It goes on to talk about the limitations of HRV prediction, which we've kind of talked about, and understanding that really it's our subjective measures, right? That's ultimately going to tell us more so how recovered are we. Okay, so use that subjective measure each day rather than working on or looking at your devices and saying, oh, HRV is suppressed today. Don't be as concerned with that. Okay. Don't get hung up on that. I told my athletes the story, and I've talked about this in the past. The morning that I woke up for UTMB, I was, at 6 p.m. that night, I was about to race UTMB. I had been wearing the Whoop strap. For those that are familiar, it's another technological tracking device that you wear on your wrist, and it has optical sensors that determine your HRV, resting heart rate, etc. And it gives you a score, basically a readiness score, like I talked about previously. And unfortunately, my Whoop was in the red that day, which means, and it said, do not do any physical activity on this given day. Yeah, so here I am about to line up for UTMB, and this device is telling me I should not be going to, anywhere near a starting line, right? I shouldn't even be exercising on that given day. I should just be laying around and resting. That's what the Whoop was telling me. Now, again, going back to these readiness scores and everything, um, I had to say, listen, hey, I got no option today, and I don't feel bad, right? Like I woke up, I felt rested, felt ready to go. I was excited. My motivation was high. So, I mean, I had all of these positive things, and this one little, thing from technology deterring me from trying to go exercise or trying to go run this race. And honestly, I got out there and I felt fine. Now I went too hard. I went too hard because I felt so good. That was my own fault, my own stupidity. But if I had listened to that, if I had let that creep into my mind and create doubt, oh man, it could have wrecked me. So don't rely so much upon these scores, right? Again, there's not enough context for these devices to tell us you should not be exercising today, right? And again, HRV is based on so many different variables that we don't want to get hung up on the fact that we are suppressed today. Now you may not feel your best, but do you need to go out for an hour run? I mean, if you're really feeling bad, obviously you get out there and you try for 10, 15 minutes and you're like, "Whoa, I'm just dragging today." That might be the day to take off. But, let yourself be able to determine that, not this technological device that's feeding you a score. Okay. Listen to your body. That's the biggest thing. That's the biggest takeaway. Okay. I hope that gives you some insight into this. Again, I will share these resources in the show notes. Have a listen to the podcast, read through the article. Keep learning, right? Like that's the big thing. Keep learning. That's what it's all about. And this, we may find other studies that present different data, right? But until then, it's great to stay up to date and to hear from these various sources and hear about these various studies. So continue to learn, continue to grow, continue to use what you can. But most of all, the biggest takeaway, listen to your body. That's the biggest thing. Okay. Want to thank, oh my gosh, there's quite a few people, but I got an email from Dirk this morning. Very touching article. And I'm going to link the article that he sent because I think it was a fantastic read about connecting and being a part of the community and finding friends. It's a wonderful article. I wrote back to Dirk and I said, I believe the Lord puts, people on our path at certain points when we need the most. And this article was touching, extremely touching. I was really, really emotional reading through this because it was just such a great. It was well written, really, vulnerable, which I try as much I can on this podcast and in life to be as open and as vulnerable as I can. Um, and make connections. And even though some of my connections are virtually with many people, it still makes a difference not only in my lives but in those that I work with because of people like Dirk. He opened my art, not my heart, and my eyes to to a wonderful author, and I want to thank him personally for doing that, for thinking of me. He was listening to the podcast and kind of hearing some of the episodes and things that I'm going through, that people are going through. And that's the wonderful thing about, community. It really is. And Dirk, thank you. I can't thank you enough for sending that on. And for so many of you for reaching out and kind of going through, a lot of this stuff with me. It's, I'm in a good place. I truly am. I have, I have so many good things going on. I recognize, that there is, I may not be where I want to be right now for running. That's a change in my life. That's difficult. But I'm also recognizing, and this is something I talked to my friend Zach on a run the other day about, is that, I'm not the priority right now. I have been able to be my own, runner and do what I want for so long, but sometimes it's just not your time. And right now, it's not my time. My focus is not on myself, and I don't mean to sound selfish, because running, it can be a selfish endeavor. It certainly can be. But right now, it's those that I coach's time, especially the kids that I'm coaching. Their success on Friday night. We went to Friday Night Light in Kernersville, and our team raced. And to see their performances, but not only see their performances, but hear them afterwards, and hear the comments that they're making. Hey, coach, like I wasn't anxious, I was excited. Like that's the mentality that we're working on. And then when they performed, they recognized that because they weren't anxious, because they were excited, and because they had fun, they performed. they're recognizing that the anxieties that are created pre-race, those pre-race jitters, are detracting from their performances. That's massive. And that's something that I've harped on from the beginning with these guys. And we jumped up in the state rankings in 3A. We're in the 3A division. The girls jumped up to second. And now this is still early season. Lots of stuff can happen. Okay. But the girls jumped up to second and the boys jumped up to fourth. My son jumped up to fourth in the state in the 5K. And so he is doing amazing. I'm so proud of him. I'm proud of my daughter. She's racing extremely well. She won her meet last week and then she was second yesterday. So they're doing extremely well. And, but they're also taking away from the fact that, hey, like I can have fun with this. I can enjoy this and I can still perform at an extremely high level. And that's what I love. I absolutely love that fact. I mean, it feels like I'm starting to channel my inner Ted Lasso. Y'all know how much I love Ted Lasso. And oh my gosh, like, just the fact that they are growing as as young adults, it's touching and it's a great part to be a part of. And that's what makes it so much worth it to put their needs in front of my own. And that's the way it should be. These kids, they're they're doing amazing things, and I love being a part of that. Yeah, I love growing with them, and seeing them just have these awesome times and results, and creating these experiences. I like this is something that I hope they look back on and can remember. Not me. Like, I mean, sure, they remember that maybe they remember Coach Saft, but I want them to remember their experiences. I remember when I did this. I remember how hard it was and, how much I worked for it. And hopefully they can apply that moving forward in life. So yes, so my priority has changed. I am still planning on running the Cannonball Marathon in October and the JFK 50 miler in November. But the reality is they're probably going to be just fun experiences to be out there and a part of the community and getting to do some stuff for myself because we still need that, right? Like there is a time where we do need to do things for ourselves, but the goal isn't as high. It's really just to get out there and do it and just have a good time. Of course I want to train for it and be ready for it, but I have to realize the day in and day out there's so many other things that have to transpire. So but man, and Dirk was one of the ones that reached out to me about coaching. I've had a number of people start to reach out about coaching, which is wonderful. I thank you guys for being interested and giving me a shot at potentially coaching you. And if you are so interested or so inclined to want to have that conversation, please reach out. My contacts are in the show notes. It's it's a joy and honor and a privilege to be a coach. I was thinking this morning like how much I really feel like I found the calling that I was really meant to do. Not only with the adults that I coach, but with the youth. At this high school level, I feel at home. I feel like I found my place, which is so awesome. And again, I can't thank you all enough for your kind words, for your support, for being a part of this. We'll continue to grow together, continue to learn together. As I learn things and find out things, I will continue to share them with you. I've got a coaching clinic coming up. USCA is putting on an endurance running clinic. It's going to be back in Colorado Springs. I cannot attend in person this year. Our invitational, the Truly Tough Cross Country Classic, is on the same day, so I can't get out there. But I'm going to attend virtually. So things that I learn, I will certainly share. I really love that part of this podcast is being able to share these type of things. So I will share that as I learn things and disseminate them the best I can. Don't forget about the Truly Tough Cross Country Classic. If you can come out on September 28th, love to have you. Registrations on Ultra sign up. I will put that in the show notes. The trail is finished. It's so fun. I love it out there. I just enjoy going running back on those trails. It is so enjoyable. So I hope you will come join us if you can. If you can't but want to make a donation, please just reach out to me. And I thank you for all of you that have contributed. It goes right to the team, and it helps support us. Trips like we did to Kernersville, that's it's an expense that some kids usually can't afford, and it's great to be able to provide that to these kids. So I thank you for your support and for all you do for our community. Again, reach out with questions, comments, concerns. I love hearing from you guys, just like Dirk sent that article. So if you have an article that, you felt was a game changer, was informative, please send that on. I love reading these things and it's all about learning and continuing to grow. Even if it's contrary to something I've said, like it's fantastic. Like I said, it can change my mind and certainly make me grow as well. So that's the biggest thing. So thank you all. Thank you to my Patreon supporters. I hope you guys have a great rest of your week. I do have Travis Macy scheduled, so we should be recording next week. So expect that podcast within the coming weeks. Travis and I will release on both of our platforms. So for those of you that don't know Travis Macy, he is an amazing runner, father, athlete, writer. He's authored 2 books now. He's got a great podcast. So check out Travis Macy. Look forward to having him on. He's a great coach as well. And that's probably what we're going to talk about is coaching. So I hope you've enjoyed today. If it raises more questions than than answers for you, again, always worth a conversation, always worth talking about. So thank you, my friends. And until next time, keep running. We keep moving forward. Running is life.